Imagine opening your email to find years of history deleted. Only a single email remains. A ransomware request for $2 million. You think to yourself, how could this happen to me? You see, there's two types of companies. Those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. The weight of responsibility comes crashing down on you. It's the sort of responsibility you feel when your family is craving a delicious pizza. You finally open the box only to find the most cringe-worthy topping that you mistakenly ordered. Join Pineapple on Pizza podcast as John and George, along with guest executives, discuss the most common and craziest cybersecurity risks, followed by actionable tips and strategies that can be implemented to protect your cyber risk pie. Pineapple on Pizza is hosted by Omnistruck.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Pineapple on Pizza. Today, we have an awesome international guest, and he's an advocate for mood boosting among executives. He's a passionate for the analytic interpretation of data, Gaelic footballer, and has played in front of hundreds of thousands of people. He's now the founder at Aeroband Limited. Welcome, Brandon McKittrick.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
McKittrick. I'm sorry. I put an R in there where it was or an N where it was an R. So forgive me on that.
That's okay.
So if cyber risk was a pizza and the frameworks were the crust, what's the riskiest topping you've seen, and what would you equate that to?
Great question. Over the years, actually, the one topping that I put on the pizza, which is the greatest danger, is the internal threat. Having worked with small companies and all the way up to billion-dollar companies as a CTO, CIO, it's the internal threat, the data leakage due to some malicious actions internally. That's the big one I've seen over the years. That's kind of a silent killer. It can happen in lots of little micro transactions, or it could be on a larger scale. But typically, that's the one where I see damage done to businesses.
And what topping would you equate that to on a pizza?
It'd have to be something that would sort of sneakily get on the pizza, be devoured, and actually taste nice. Possibly something to do with genetically modified cheese, which looks okay, tastes okay, but actually is not very good for you.
I'm gonna say maybe something like vegan cheese at that point.
Well, I don't upset all the vegans, but
something
that didn't involve a real cow.
All right. I like your answer better. All right. So tell me, as founder, what keeps you up at night?
Well, hopefully, most of the time it's a passionate pursuit where you're trying to create something new. In the case of I love AI, I love blockchain. I'm really, really focused on the crosshairs of decentralized storage and smart contracts meets decentralized AI. I think that's the sweet spot of the legendary DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization that we all talk about, but I've yet to see one that's truly decentralized and truly autonomous. So all the DAOs out there are actually O's. So this is my pursuit. It's my willingness to sort of to give my time on an altruistic pursuit, which, it's ahead of its time in the sense that, you can do a lot of things in AI, you can do a lot of things in blockchain, but to go for the holy grail of the crosshairs, that's something that keeps me thinking. I've worked a lot with AI in maritime shipping, helping a company called Rippy at the moment, who's doing some amazing stuff in a very broken industry. Our own pursuit in Aeroband is similar sort of, evangelical role in aviation. And again, they're not alone, those industries. There's lots of industries that are using very, very old technology. And what often happens is folks come out of college and say, hey, I'm going to build an app that does, say, loyalty for aviation, right? And in a previous role, we used to do a lot of due diligence on small companies that wanted to be bought up into the big machine, and say, hey, we got this app. And the problem was they couldn't talk to the legacy systems. Great technology, beautifully groomed, UX that would knock you dead, but no interface of note to the legacy systems. And I think you need that ecosystem And that will involve interfaces to the legacy systems 30, 40 years old in any industry, but particularly aviation, maritime, those industries, travel, transportation, railway systems, they're decrepit, like, let's be blunt about it. And if you can create an ecosystem that buffers that interface and then gives this rapid environment for development, and you're starting to talk Web3 environments, blockchain enabled, AI enabled, APIs wrapped around, artificial general intelligence available, on tap, then you're starting to create rapid, rollout of apps that used to take years down to 2 months. And my dream, and what keeps me awake at night, and to fully answer your question, is getting that sweet spot of AI, blockchain, and that rapid Web3 development environment down to even maybe AI can create the apps for you in the press of a button. Create me an app that does loyalty for aviation. I mean, how far away are we from that? Maybe not as far as we think we are.
Where in aviation might this happen? I mean, I think we're all pretty familiar with the reality that, well, let's just use the most common names, the Airbuses and the Boeings. Those aren't Airbus or Boeing engines that are the jet engines, right? They're manufactured by GE or Rolls-Royce or somebody, right? So there's suppliers and different markets that feed aviation. Which one do you think, like, what part of aviation do you think is like the first touch where this might happen, where, successful?
So the massively engineered components, like say the Rolls-Royce or the General Electric engines, they're massively well engineered. They're highly regulated, and they're safety tested to the limits. It's not very common for engines to fail, in service. And there's all the C checks and A checks and D checks. There's a huge ecosystem around safety of the aircraft.
Oh yeah.
And then we had the fly-by-wire, come in about 20 years ago, and since then it's all electronics, and there's 3 computers, handshaking on decisions, except for the Boeing 737 MAX, where they sort of cut back on that redundancy, and we all know what happened there, tragically.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to be the engineering. However, if you look at the traceability of parts that are, part on, part off, is a sort of model for aircraft. Generally, the certification of the parts is generally okay. I'd say generally, because there are some leakage. But to try and get that all into, say, a blockchain lineage database and a distributed ledger, let's forget the blockchain because it has connotations and so forth. But if you had a distributed ledger lineage, which was immutable, and everybody could have access to it through a smart contract, and you knew that this part had so many flying hours and so forth, the transfer of aircraft between, say, lessor and client airline would be massively smoothened. And there are directions in there, but that's what I call the big problem of everybody jumping at the same time. That's massively difficult. The easier one to do is to create new apps around the 100, and there's 150, say, applications used by airlines. And that's from anything from revenue management to, cargo tracking, all of these things. And they're all very old. And I think the sort of point of entry, George, to answer your question, will be one of those. But the precursor to that is you've got to create a layer of abstraction above the legacy systems, because you don't switch them off overnight. So what you do is you create a layer of abstraction that says, hey, the kids coming out of college can now develop better apps than I can because they don't care about the legacy. So the layer of abstraction, to me, it's a rapid development environment. And what that then allows is the back end to be, switched in, switched out, switched in, switched out, nice and smoothly without changing all that ecosystem, because it's very hard coded right down at the moment. So I think what we're trying to do at the moment ourselves is to create that ecosystem which is open to everybody. I had a VC say to me, you want me to give you money to build software and give it away to the industry? And I went, bingo. He said, you got 60 seconds to convince me this is a good idea. He said, I like it, but he said, why would I do that? And I said, the reality is it's not that simple. But the analogy I gave him was, let's build the railway tracks. Let's specify the gauge, the weight loading and all that kind of stuff, and say, hey, if you can build a train that meets this requirement, you can run on the tracks. And you're going to pay a very small fee per kilometer or per mile just to keep the system running. Now that organization would be an industry-owned organization, and a true DAO maybe in 5 years' time, and I won't have any ownership of that. And that's the giveaway, and it just washes its face by a small transaction fee. However, if you build trains and lovely carriages, that's your software. That's where we make money as an organization. That's where we're profitable. But you've got to create that ecosystem. The railway tracks have got to be laid. That's the challenge, I think, George, that really is the hardest part of shifting an industry to Web3 or to new technologies or whatever it may be.
Well, monetization concept, I know that there's lots of ways to make sure a business goes forward, and to be passionate about the businesses, where the vision, as well as setting the proper mission that helps you row towards that vision. I think what comes to mind for me is, at least top of mind, is that it's fairly clear that there is a lot of change occurring in the airline industry in terms of profits, right? So, because my understanding is they used to sell the plane and make money off the plane, right? Then the margins got tight, there's competition, and then they sold the maintenance, and they were making profits off of maintenance. And now they're selling guarantees, like so. And I learned about this because I went to an event, somebody that works for GE that makes the engines, and they said, now what we do is we sell insurance. So we're going to guarantee that engine is going to work for 20 years, but we have all this sensory built into the engine. And it'll tell you whether, the pilot has to stop flying it at a certain speed. They have to, so as the engine wears, the pilot has to start following new rules on how they fly the plane, or they void the insurance plan, because we'll replace the engine for free. You won't have to pay for maintenance or anything. And so, but you pay a premium for so now they're making money off of ensuring that the engine lasts for 20 years, but then they set sensory within the engine so they can kind of control how the pilots fly the plane. I mean, it's gotten to that point. And I remember the very first question I asked him, I said, what if somebody hacks that sensory? Like, what if somebody gets into that network that's communicating, to the plane and to the pilots? Then what? What are you going to do about that? And, so, well, the sensory doesn't control. And then he started to explain, and I was like, yeah, this is going to be interesting to see what happens, because, all these companies that make the planes have to make money somewhere, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business. And I wonder about that commoditization and innovation. And you see something like you mentioned, the Max. My brain is ticking, saying, well, wait a second, what sacrifices might be made in order to move the industry forward? And is blockchain the answer? Is that how you block out the hackers, right? So, not literally per se, but it's like, that, in the back of my mind, that's what I'm thinking, is that there's a security, risk in, hacking a plane while you're flying on it, right? Kind of generically. So the question is blockchain the answer, or the combination of what essentially is AI and blockchain? Is that part of that journey, do you think?
I think it's a perfect segue into the security aspect. It's the greater you digitize either a vehicle or an industry, the greater the attack surface, and that's what's happened in the last few years. You're right on the money there, George. In terms of the attack surface, has become quite large. Now, when you take a pilot, really only operates an aircraft for about 9 minutes in a flight. The rest is a big flick switch, and it does the rest. And then there's all this, collision avoidance technology. There's lots of upsides, right? I won't go into those, but there's lots of them. But the downside is that, you're right, we're streaming huge amounts of data off every engine. There's a whole IoT landscape. Securing IoT, I'm not an expert in IoT security, but it's always been a little concern as a CTO or a CIO when somebody says, oh yeah, we've got IoT devices. For some reason, and I could be totally wrong here, just my radar goes, ugh. I've got this little device out at the edge of my estate collecting data, and I got to rely on that data for decision making. I got to know that device is giving me, and you can average it out and you can fog it out and do all of those things, because sometimes you get a wrong reading or whatever. And we use it a lot in cargo to say, pharma, like the first vaccines had to be transported at -28 or something. And you couldn't give that to a human if it, the aberration was too great. So let's take it a step further. Let's say these aircraft can be flown autonomously for both takeoff and landing, because that's really what the pilot is there for. And the two pilots is to make sure that, there's a backup. So let's assume at some stage in the future, there's no pilots. And that'll start with small electric aircraft, the little 8 rotovator type little, little hoppers that'll take you from the top of your business building to the nearest airport and that kind of stuff. And they're going to be programmed with a flight map, and they're going to have a route map, and there'll be no TAMs notice to airmen saying, hey, this aircraft is operating in this space. And at that stage, the scenario you're talking about here becomes very real, because anything that's electronic or controlled is hackable. And anyone who's ever written software for any of these things, if you speak them face to face and you ask them that question, they'll never deny that it's unhackable. That's never a scenario. So to say it's hackable, the question is how hackable or how likely. And if you do enough flight hours, if you say, oh, it's 1 in 1,000, okay, let's fly 1,000 flights. So one of those is going to be hacked. And obviously there's going to be target focus on net value individuals, or could you hack a little electric, aircraft and take a high net worth individual to a place. So the whole hijacking history that we know with aircraft can be done without human risk to the hijackers, because obviously they've got to be very passionate, because if they go up there and hijack an aircraft, you're probably not going to survive given the statistics of what happens, So the risk now is lowered for the attacker, the bad actor. So I would say that that's a very, very real concern. There's nobody on the aircraft to switch manual, say, hey, flipping manual here, all electronics, made secondary. And I would say that the way to deal with that, it's going to be the same for most transport to avoid it to be hackable. Again, IoT and blockchain is a good combination. The biggest challenge for blockchain has been its speed. Historically, blockchains have not been fast enough to deal with high velocity data. They're a lot better now. And there are now distributed ledgers, which can take, huge amounts of data, and they do a lot of sharding and locality capturing. They're not blockchains. A strict blockchain should, broadcast the same transaction or information across the whole network. And that's all data on every node all of the time, which is the Bitcoin model. So the truest decentralized blockchain is Bitcoin. And I think the reason why it would give added value would because if you can secure at all points, obviously the transaction, lifetime or end-to-end security is only as strong as the weakest point, as you obviously know. So getting it secured as early as possible. So the blockchain node could be built into the IoT, and it would be some sort of a locality broadcast. That's why I say distributed ledger would be much more suitable, where it didn't have to broadcast to every connected node. And then the consensus time is one of the challenges with blockchain as well. Distributed ledgers don't need that consensus time, where often they're not interested in sequentiality. They just they timestamp it at the node and say, hey, I got this information, timestamp, it's authentic, it's got a digital certificate or something more sophisticated. I'm accepting this, broadcast to my network, and everybody goes, that looks good. And that's your consensus. So it's real time, high transaction rates. Consensus is where every node has to agree in the sequence. So if I send you guys a WhatsApp message right now, my sending of the WhatsApp message might cross with one of yours. So my message went out first, your message came in second. But in your WhatsApp, your message went first and mine came second. So we have a difference in consensus there. It's just our view, it's our time view of the world. That's all. And so that's why distributed ledgers. But something like that would be a way to secure it, George. But I'd still, with total honesty, say if there's an aircraft up there with 200 to 300 people on it, and there's no pilot and it's totally autonomous, I would be quite concerned. And in terms of you opened with the engines, and the engines are getting more and more connected. My understanding is the engine can't be controlled remotely other than on the aircraft itself. So it just is a read-only generator. But in time, in time, there's going to have to be a holistic control of that aircraft. And obviously the autopilot is much more sophisticated than it used to be. So can it be hacked? Yeah. Well, all those systems are separated on board as well, but can they be hacked? Let's see. The more digitized it gets, the more dangerous it gets.
I think that the level of risk and the danger that you speak of does make me think of a future where, as you're boarding a pilotless plane, that there is a parachute kiosk to your right that you can elect to rent a parachute for the flight, just in case.
A launch pad.
But that also is an indicator of how things get built. I want to hear safe and slow when it comes to the engine, and as a passenger, right? You want to make sure that they spent some time, and the MAX situation hasn't helped things for the flying public, so to speak. But and
a bit of nervousness about the authorities as well, saying the aircraft is so old, it's been so proven, a little tweak here and there is not going to do any harm. So there is a regulatory oversight there that didn't do what it was supposed to do as part of the problem, not the only part, but part of the problem, because it's so certified for so long, people get lapse.
And I do wonder if traditionally, right, a lot of startups and they're not startups anymore, but now these established brands, and I apologize to the Facebook company, but I'm going to use them as an example. I'm aware that at one point when they hired developers, they had something they told every person they brought on board, which is go fast and break things. Get your hands on the code, let's go quickly. I can't imagine a world in aviation where that kind of a mindset is part of the hiring process. Hey, go fast and break things, or we got to build this plane, right? That's probably not the kind of culture you're going to see when it comes to what essentially is the public's perception of anything aircraft, right? Even if you and I know in this discussion that we're not talking about engines and where are these other opportunities to go more quickly, I think it's going to be a very regulated environment with any kind of, and I'm not saying pilotless planes, I'm saying that even with pilots and as your backup, there are just certain things that make sense where using more secure methods of communication or opportunities within IoT within the aircraft, that absolutely makes sense. But there's probably a limit there. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag. Would you agree that there's some things that
I do, and it's the Swiss cheese. I worked one of the greatest jobs I had, the most enjoyable I have to say job was I worked for the Royal Flight of Oman, the Sultan's flight, and I used to come in the morning and get my little kawa, the little teas that they have, and walk out on the platform. You could see the 747 SP, and it was fascinating. But one of the jobs I had there was to deep dive into the history and to look at incident management and really securing the estate from making sure that it was fully operational to the highest standards of security and all of that from a mechanical engineering point of view and software. And that was long enough ago to see that software was starting to bleed into the industry, because before that was heavy engineering and all of that, and avionics was the next sort of chapter. And then it became avionics plus software. And what I noticed was the difference between the standards of software and the standards of avionics. The avionics standards were way, 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 way higher. There was just nothing got on them. It had to be type certified. There was a rigor that came in, with aviation. And typically what used to happen was that the chief pilot would become the head or the CEO of the organization. Like a lot of organizations, the pilot would be obsessed with safety, having spent most of his life sitting in a seat on, a couple of 100 tons of metal behind him. So he would have this mindset. And I did notice at first it was very hard to get software in because they would be thinking of the engineering type certified mindset, which is a good thing. But they use the analogy of the Swiss cheese a lot, where, you got a hole in the cheese, but typically the hole goes, 10% deep in the cheese. Sometimes it goes, 50%. That's a big hole in the cheese. But what often happens is two holes meet each other. Two unrelated events just create this hole right through the cheese. And that event was one of these black swans where, somebody did something very, very uninteresting and something else happens. And the two things come together to create a disaster. And it was the avoiding of that Swiss cheese scenario was really exactly what you're saying, George, where it might be the failure of an IoT device that gave a wrong signal, which then led to a cascade of events where the pilot made a decision that was catastrophic. And the MAX was a good example of that. The MAX was a really good example. And it was also a good example where the prevailing software mindset globally, not in aviation, but globally, bled into the avionics. That was a really interesting case study because I watched MH370 last night. It was actually my wife was watching it on Netflix. A great documentary on the disappearance of MH370. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And having worked with aircraft, how could an aircraft disappear? There's so many signals coming out of that. There's satellite and there's an emergency. If the aircraft behaves erratically, it sends out a very significant signal that says, hey, here's all my data. I'm in trouble. And that's not even manually activated. That's automatically activated. So I had to go back to a few of the engineers that I knew in Oman, some brilliant guys there. There's one guy, Mohammed Al-Busaidi, he was just a genius. I used to spend, 3 to 4 hours every evening drinking green tea with this man and just, learning the history. They had the first certified 747 in an environment which was low utilization maintenance. They call it LUMP, L-U-M-P, low utilization maintenance program. And Boeing didn't have a program for that. And back to your security of the aircraft, if you don't have a maintenance program which can deal with extremely high temperatures, extreme amounts of sand, extreme amounts of salt because it was on the sea, and very, very, very low utilization, you can over maintain an aircraft. So to create that was done about 25, 30 years ago. And it was a fascinating voyage of how the ground was set for the 747. The second one was Saddam Hussein's. His 747 inherited that. And that was the genesis of the low utilization maintenance program in adverse environments. So there is a whole philosophy around there. And that needs to be carried through to answer your question, George, where that mindset needs to be carried from the elders to the new engineers, which was one of the break points in Boeing where they let go of a lot of these expensive older guys because, 737, it's unbreakable. And the new kids coming in, not obviously kids, but new engineers coming in will just pick up the running. But the elders should have been kept around because a lot of them complained that this is not going. The Swiss cheese was starting to get deeper and deeper on both sides. And they could see that. And I think that's a hugely emotional human thing, George. That's away from, just regulation and best practices around creating things. That's a lot of pilots I speak to, they use the gut instinct. They've told me stories where the gut instinct is a huge factor in what they do. They just know something is wrong. I was, if I'm off topic, pull me back, but I'm just anecdotally connecting a few stories. You triggered a part of the brain that was probably, dormant. I had a very good friend in the UK, and he was known to be the best RAF helicopter, rotary pilot of his time. He passed away last year, sadly, but he had an amazing life. And he had been in the Dhofar Wars in Oman in the 70s, and you name it, he participated. But he told me his gut instinct was a huge part of his flying success. He just knew something, as a good Scotsman would, he'd get this instinct and he'd act on that instinct, and it kept him alive in a lot of difficult situations. So again, even with all the regulation and all the, the technology, the human spirit and the human connectivity to outside knowledge, or whatever sort of wiring we have as the human condition is still important. Still very, very important instinctively to know something's right or something's wrong. So that's another overlay on top of that as well.
I would, as many, many people in HR probably understand it, because I know human resource folks study this, the reptilian brain and how it reacts. It's the instinct, just sometimes you just have that gut. And, in our family, we often said, "Hey, trust your gut. If your gut is telling you something's off, there probably is something off."
And there's actually a neural network in your gut. There's a neural network in your heart and your gut. And the one in the heart was only discovered a couple of years ago. There's a great company in California that actually measures synchronicity between your heart and your head. And amazing. And they use it. I think the LA police use it after a traumatic event. They sit down and they reach this sort of coherence, which, self-heals. And they're getting huge results on reduction in heart attacks and so forth. So that brain heart, sort of combination is really important. But your gut also has there's 3 neural networks in your body, and they're all important.
See, now that explains why the first girl I fell in love with, why it hurt so much when she broke up with me. Things are connected after all, huh?
And I definitely have enough gut. I can feel it.
You have a big gut instinct.
Well, one thing is for sure is that there's clearly solutions out there for the industry that have yet to be discovered. This is an amazing and interesting topic to discuss, is, if you want to call it or be so daring, automation within the aviation industry in general. My gut, since we're talking about gut, it tells me that some of those first unmanned aircraft may be cargo aircraft. That might be, and obviously we have it already with drones, controlled aircraft, and there's some automation that has to be built into those. But I think the future is bright. And so in terms of what your thoughts are, I mean, how are things now, do you think, in the aviation industry with all these things you're working on? I mean, or is it moving forward? Is it stuck? Is it
erroneously or otherwise on a stage? I once said that airlines are stupid. And when I got off the stage, I was approached by a high-profile CFO who said, I didn't really like that remark, Brendan. No. I said, I tell you what, if I can prove to you in 60 seconds it's true, we'll have a beer together. That was in my beer drinking days, John. I told you beforehand, I haven't drank since 2011.
Quota. Hit the quota.
An anomaly for an Irishman, But anyway, we had a chat, and I said, look, I know the airline you work for 2 reasons. One is I flew in with your airline, and I also work with the largest revenue accounting service. Is one of the products we had in that company. So it's the largest revenue accounting company in the world. So I said, I flew in with your airline, and you invested hundreds of millions in your aircraft, the training of your pilots, your staff, the facilities, the capital expenditure to create this whole monster. I said, I took a taxi from the airport to the hotel, and the taxi driver made more on me than you did. And he went, wow, what beer do you drink, And he said, tell me more. And this was pre-COVID. And what they were making was the average ticket in the aviation. Averages are dangerous, but it's such a big industry. Let's use it in simplicity. So $180 was the average ticket price, selling price. And they made about $6 per ticket. That was the average for the industry. Now, obviously, business class, and there's lots of variations and so forth. But for the industry, it's a poor indicator. And the biggest outages, obviously, in-house were salaries and, all the overheads and all of that. But there were so many middlemen actually consuming that, pot. And the middlemen were doing something the airlines could not do, or not, at least not do it well. The middlemen were providing a service where they aggregated flights together, because the customer said, I don't really care about the airline that much. I do loyalty sort of twist me a little bit, but generally get me from A to B to C, or from A to C, and there might be a stopover in B or whatever, but give me an aggregated solution from multiple sources. I don't care about the metal I fly in. I do care about the service and so forth, and I care about the time and the cost. And those middlemen have created a great aggregation service. But it's very much anchored in technology from the 60s and 70s. And it's also 48% of all of those interline tickets that are sold today 48% of them run through software written in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Like, it's horrific. It's horrific. And ironically, those systems are quite secure because they're so isolated and so hard to hack. The old systems, because the way they're written is very minimalist code, is stacked on top of it. You'd have to be an expert to be able to hack them. But the airlines don't make a lot of money. So what you have to do with the industry is to disintermediate so that the airlines actually have the affordable budgets to modernize and so forth. So there's kind of a cat and mouse here, a chicken and an egg, if you like. And that's really the challenge, because they can't see the light, and they don't want to invest in something that just brings them deeper into a debt. And they just run with what's there. They just don't have that motivation or that nudge economics. And that's why we're creating an ecosystem to say, hey, this is for you guys. And also, we have an incentive with airlines that we think will work. We'll say, look, if 3 airlines, we have an ID tree, we call it, the design of 3 stakeholders. You guys will own the revenue, or part of the revenue from this application. So you can rent it to other airlines. You own the rental income of that application. So if you help us build this application, it could be an airport. We built a smart contract for airports, for example. And it just takes away all of the disputes. There's huge amounts of disputes over what actually landed at an airport, believe it or not. What tail was it? Oh, it was supposed to be a 380, but a 777 landed. Yeah, we switched it. But my operation system, yeah, well, your operation system is the scheduling. What was the actuals and what did the satellite say? And you've got to combine all of these. So if you have a smart contract that says, hey, I have one pane of truth, we both digitally certified, here's your answer, and here's your daily invoice. So you've got to simplify it and then upsell into the applications and so forth. So airlines are very, they're risk averse, but they're also investment averse. With a few exceptions, the likes of Emirates, I have to say, is amazing. They created a lot of tech 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that took the world by storm. Their revenue accounting, their cargo system, all built in-house. Brilliant jobs, but they've aged. They're old now, and they need a refresh. They need to do that again, but just drop the old systems and replace them with new Web3 type solutions. So they are poking around that area, as are like Lufthansa, again, another airline with great reputation. But what they need, George, is a platform. They need something that gets them into an accelerated environment with little investment. Their margins are so small for airlines. It's very hard to reinvest. And you just have huge debt on your aircraft. You were right earlier saying that, this gets outsourced. The MRO gets outsourced. The maintenance. Then you outsource this, and the check-in desk is now a different company. And they've peeled all that away from the core system, but they still haven't solved their profitability challenge. And that's the biggest challenge for them. So you've got to give them something that's radically different, low investment. So it's not a big CapEx. Say, you don't pay for this. We'll build this based on, a token raise that raises, tens of millions. And we invest that back into an infrastructure upgrade. And nobody pays hard cash for that, but you use it and, it has to be an enduring solution over decades, the coming decades. It can't be just a one quick win in one little area. It's got to support those 150 applications that are overdue a rehaul,
Yeah, I do wonder if maybe a controversial topic, but I do wonder if the revenue models in commercial flight is what I can relate to the best, and I imagine I can't remember the Amazon division that does freight. They've got
they have their own airline, Prime.
Where you can hire one of their trucks or one of their planes now, sort of a thing to move your stuff. So I know there's other industries is the point, but I do wonder, at least in commercial aviation, if it's possible, and this is the controversial part, is here, at least in America, if you have healthcare, right, you pay a premium every month. And then you go see the doctor and you pay a copay, and sometimes the copay is a little bit more, not everything is covered. Are we possibly going to see a future where you're subscribing, in terms of the monetization model, where you're paying like a monthly fee for the right to fly, and then you have like a copay where you book that flight and it's not as much, and so the people who fly more frequently, right? Is that really the problem? Is the monetization model and how they're charging the airlines in commercial aviation anyway? They just always seem to, be playing this game of, transactional. Everything's transactional, right?
Yeah.
Book a flight, you pay for it and away you go. And the rest of the world is moving into the subscription models, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to minimize risk?
I love the idea. I love the concept, and I think it's something that should be played with for two reasons. One is the introduction of the sort of short hop electric aircraft. That's a coming. And that's the bridge between your hometown and the big airport that you're flying out of for the long haul. That connection is coming, and I know a couple of the big airlines in the US are already, putting money into some really neat startups. And I think the first startups will be hybrid, and they'll have some sort of eco-friendly fuel mixed with electric capabilities. The electric sort of mid-size aircraft is a way. It's a long way away, despite what people are saying. There's a lot of investment. Just talking to really seasoned engineers with really good logic, there's a lot of reasons that the sort of mid-sized big aircraft won't be electric for a while. But the small hop, yes. So that's kind of that jumps at you as a subscription thing for frequent flyers and so forth. Now here's the connectivity. The second reason is if you bring a Web3 environment and you tokenize people's behaviors in terms of, you can have microtransactions, and you can tip the pilot if you want to, or you can take your rewards for flying and become a part owner of the aircraft. Say, hey, no, just put it in the aircraft, and I want to buy that seat, the revenue off that seat, a portion of that revenue, or I want to flip those tokens. See, but with Web3, it's all low cost of movement of value. That's all it is, really, at the end of the day. And it's secure, and it's got lineage and so forth. So people can trust each other because they don't need the middleman to trust that transaction. The middleman's gone. It's myself and John can switch, aero tokens between us because I want to give him a free flight because he's a good friend of mine or something like that, And that kind of fluidity of transfer of value, coupled with these little flights around the place and so forth, and then a reward system that says, what do you want to do with this? Whereas today, the reward system that comes in, it's clunky, it's chunky, you sort of sign up for it, you get some notional token or a reward token that you can, buy an iPad if you fly enough, and it's kind of abstract. You should be able to go to an ATM and just draw down that in hard fiat anywhere in the world, or you're sitting at a gate and your flight gets cancelled. You should get a little bing bing in your digital wallet on your phone that says, hey, flight has been cancelled. Here's tokens that can be used for anything. You can cash it out at the ATM, you can go and stay in a hotel, or you can take a flight on our competitor. Because at the end of the day, the customer is king, and we need to get you to where you need to be. And emotionally, I would love an airline for allowing me to take that credit onto a different airline and fly to where I need to be, because it could be a funeral, it could be something very important to me, and they're understanding my job to be done in a very fluid way. And that's why I think tokenization should be more than just obviously just a token that's, as in the other sense of the word, the token gesture. It's a token that actually transfers value between players, stakeholders, owners, owners of the aircraft and so forth. And that creates a fluidity around something that would really lend itself to a subscription model, George, where you would buy into it with tokens maybe, or you would get tokens that would grow and that's your loyalty. You'd be loyal to where you think the best value is coming to you as an individual. And at the moment, it's very chunky. Like if I lived in, say, Ottawa, which I did, and I moved back to Europe, I'd love to swap all my, Air Canada points with whatever country I'm flying back to. And someone says, hey, I'm moving to Canada. Let's, there should be a big pool of exchange there where my tokens should have some value. They're on the balance sheet of Air Canada, even if I don't use them, since the law was brought in about 15 years ago, where it's actually part of your balance sheet, where they were giving away all these things far too freely. So they became part of the balance sheet. So from that point of view, it's easy to transfer that in a big pool where I give my, allegiance to that airline to somebody else, and they give me theirs. And the token rates would be set by market demand. Maybe my Air Canada are 1.2, whatever the airline they had, based on supply and demand. So I think the whole subscription would fit into that so smoothly. I think that would be a lovely model for folks who say, hey, I'm going to spend a lot of my life flying. It's part of what I do. And I want to be part of that club. And I want to have, the lounge access. I want to have a little bit of comfort. I might be picked up. I mean, Emirates do a pickup service where they weigh your bags the chauffeur weighs your bags at the back of the car. He has a built-in weighing machine. He can check you in the car. And they eventually want to drive you to the aircraft where you just get off the car, walk up the steps. It's pretty wild. And I love it. It's just saying, hey, what's the smoothest journey for the customer? And subscription could give you those kind of benefits. Hey, subscribe. You can get a car to your door, and a car home, which you do with Emirates, and all of that kind of little perks in an ecosystem that makes life easy, flying easy. Yeah. Now, the airport won't be too happy if you bypass all the duty free, but that's another day's work,
Yeah. Well, one thing's for sure is that I'm definitely not that guy that's going to be being, at least with Emirates anyway, taken directly to the aircraft and have my luggage weighed in and checked into the back. I'm more of that guy that's in the back of the plane who is, oh, I'm sorry, but you've run out of points. We're gonna have to throw you off the flight mid-flight, sort of a situation. But so there, I think the valid point though is that there's a lot happening in the future in aviation, and there, at least from what I heard, there's quite a few challenges that exist in automation, and obviously there's risk there. And we've talked about a number of great topics, but we haven't talked about you. Can you tell us a little bit about your how people can get a hold of you if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
So I'm on LinkedIn. So Brendan McKittrick on LinkedIn. I think there's only 2 Brendan McKittricks on LinkedIn the last time I checked. So you should be able to figure out which one I am, probably with the picture of the airplane behind me. Always happy to connect with folks, always happy to take challenging questions and what have you, and connect. And the whole Web3 area is fantastic because there's a lot of evangelists there who just want to do good. And I love the movement as well, where technology has been pretty mechanical over the 30 years that I've been working in it, but it's become more and more humane, where we're saying, what are the big outcomes? Are we just writing a piece of code to run a bank? Or actually, are we writing code that actually is sensitive to how people live and lends itself to a better place? So I've noticed that that's the biggest shift I've seen in the 30 years. So I get a lot of folks come in with great ideas, and that's something that I love to chew. I'm actually writing a book at the moment as well around the energy of life as opposed to the mechanics of life. The 3D world, just taking it a little step higher around the energy world, which are quite different things, actually.
Well, it sounds like you've had quite a journey throughout your life, especially, and I know we didn't get a chance to talk about what you do outside of work in detail, but from the perspective of kindred spirits, I think we're both fans of let's call it what it is. It's at least across the pond referred to as football, and here we have the gridiron football. Actually, we used to play Gaelic football, and so for those of you that aren't sure what that is, it is kind of a combination of a bunch of different sports built into what essentially is like a gridiron football, American kind of football concept. But there's other things going on there too. So if you had to suggest, if somebody wanted to learn more about this Gaelic football, what analogies would you use? And I know that you're passionate about it. If you have anything you want to talk about there.
There's 2 games. There's the Gaelic. Sorry, we not finished, George?
No, I was just going to say, and then we'll we know that everyone's got tight schedules here, so if you have any last points you want to bring up as well, feel free to expand there too. So
sure. Well, one of the things I loved about Gaelic football was I retired in 1994, and said, right, time to travel the world. I was in my 20s, and everywhere I landed, it was a Gaelic football club and an Irish pub, but not in that sequence. Usually Irish pub first, Gaelic football club second. And I remember I landed in Ottawa. That was 90. I'd been in Saudi Arabia, so it's probably about 95. on Line Street, and I was on the 23rd floor of this Minto Suite apartment, which was like, I've only started my traveling sort of in earnest at that stage. So being on the 23rd floor of a building was a new experience. But I woke up to the sound of bagpipes on a Saturday morning, and I said, and now I've lost it, So I kind of went over, rubbed the window, had a look outside, and there was this trailer, and there was a couple of folks, playing bagpipes, and there was people Irish dancing on the back of the trailer. I said, I got to go down and find out what this is. Of course, it was March and it was St. Patrick's Day, but it carried to the weekend, so they have it on the weekend. And I went down and I met folks there, and then they said, oh, yeah, when I asked, we have a Gaelic football club. So I said, oh, got to play, got to play. So everywhere I've been, there's been a Gaelic football club of some description, and generally a mix between Irish folks who have moved out and locals or Irish descendants who, really wanted to play and, participate in something they felt very close to them. And it's because it's an amateur sport and nobody gets paid, some of the biggest stadiums in Europe are in Ireland, and the largest one is short of, it's less than 100,000 now because they had to reduce it for seating, but I think it's about 90,000 now. But it's a monster stadium, very modern, third biggest in Europe, and everyone who plays in there goes back to the day job the next day. And I love that. I love the fact that people give what they have, that are well cared by their communities and so forth. But it's the passion of just representing where you're from, and everybody plays from the place that they were born and come from, with a few exceptions where people have moved, moved job or whatever. But typically, there's no transfer season, there's no movement. You could be the best player in the country and play for the smallest team, and that's a fact of life, and it's not a downside for them because they represent their community, and they're usually great heroes in those communities. So the second sport, the sister sport, is hurling. And its lineage goes back several thousand years. So there's a lot of folklore around it. It's an ash stick that's cut from ash in a certain way to get the lines of the wood. And there's also a leather ball called a slither. And the act of striking that is a puck. Puck is a Gaelic word for striking that ball, which bled its way into ice hockey, actually. And the hurling game, now every Sunday morning I meet a friend of mine, and two grey-haired oldies with large gut instincts, as you said, John, go down to play a bit of hurling. So 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning is the highlight of my week, I have to say, where I get out to strike that ball, and it can go up to 300 miles an hour. There's a great satisfaction of actually catching it, hitting it, bending it, doing all sorts of little subtle things with it. It's just that passion of actually, it's a very basic thing. I essentially, it's a stick and a ball. Ice hockey has the same, attraction. Cricket, hockey, they all have that, very base level sort of, you're doing something very basic. But that's very important, I think, especially, for the human condition to move and be active. I think it's really, really important. So Gaelic football is pervaded everything I do. And the GAA is the organization, and it's a tremendous organization for all its quirks and parochial little moments it has here and there. It's actually a fantastic, fabulous organization. To go into Croke Park in Ireland, if you ever go there, there's actually a tour. But if you get to see a big game and you're sitting in that stadium, I mean, one of the best games I actually went to, and I got a bit of ribbing from this at home. I hope I'm not going over time here. My wife was born and raised in Karachi in Pakistan, and she's from the lineage of, Genghis Khan, the Mughals. And she moved to Ireland many moons ago. And I first met her in Ireland. And eventually we got married and all of that. But she wrote a book. I asked her to write a book about Gaelic football. She says, I have to be inspired. She writes children's books, among other things she does, right? Emotional intelligence, that kind of stuff. So I brought her to a Gaelic football tournament. And she said, it's a great game. She said, I'm just not connecting with it, as a writer. And I said, that's fair enough. We go home. We give it a pass. And she said, what's this game coming on? So there was a hurling game coming on at the end. And she said, oh, I want to see this. And I said, yeah, this is an ancient warrior sport. The warriors used to use the hurling to hone their skills in the down season when they weren't killing each other. They were playing hurling. And hurling kept them sharp, 300 miles an hour piece of leather coming at your head, kind of focuses the mind a little bit. So these guys were playing. And of course, when the sticks hit each other, they call it the clash of the ash. And it's a very distinctive part of hurling, and sometimes the stick is broken, but it's borderline violent, but not. If you could think of it that way. has a lot of similarities with lacrosse, just for its speed and its contact, and you can give a good shoulder.
Which came first?
Sorry?
Did hurling come first, or did Gaelic football come first, do you think? Or I think
the hurling is much older than Gaelic football.
Oh, interesting.
Apparently. The earliest reference to Gaelic football was in 1650. There was a match between my home village and another village where they kicked the ball between the two villages. And when the ball landed in one village, the beer was free for the other village. That was the basic principle of it. And they're 10 kilometers apart, so there was a lot of kicking and banging and hitting and what have you. But the story with the hurling ended with my wife Sonia saying, "Hey, I'm going to write about this. I got to write about hurling." So she picked this little turtle who's part of her Wadi tribe, and he became a famous hurler. But he overcame his fears by playing hurling. She took the slowest animal on the planet and put him into the fastest game in the world. So he ended up playing in this Croke Park Stadium. And last year they did a launch of her book, and Sonia was invited to Croke Park, and I was plus one significant other. So I got a lot of ribbon in my family saying, "Oh, so Sonia's invited to Croke Park, and you're coming along as an attachment." And I loved it. I really loved it, the whole launch. And we got to see a hurling match between Kilkenny and Clare, and a full stadium, and the roar of the crowd, and it was just fascinating. I was like really just enjoying it. I wanted Sonia to see that. It was the first time in Croke Park for her, and for the launch of the book as well. So it's kind of, the iconic stadium you would have for, American football, for baseball, all those, Soldier Field in Chicago. It's that kind of significance to it,
Yeah. The Green Monster reference in baseball. So, the parks
you
are
just know you're in a place of great history.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, this has just been a very engaging and entertaining pineapple on pizza today. I think that we love it when we have opportunities to explore industries that allow us to look into the future, as well as go back to lessons learned from the past. And we really appreciate you taking the time with us today. Unfortunately, we are running out of time now, so we're gonna really kind of have to revisit this podcast in the future, because we covered so much in what essentially is automation. I think a lot of people are interested in that topic. Well, I can imagine that this is going to be something that will be valuable to anybody who listens. And so for those of us that love football as well, and regardless of what kind of football it is,
Absolutely,
American football, is obviously very common in the U.S. But I got to tell you, if you haven't checked out Gaelic football, or even this concept of hurling, I think you probably need to check that out. So for our listeners, hey, thank you for listening. And if you did learn something today, whether you laughed, you had an opportunity to kind of connect back with some of your sporting history, please tell somebody about this podcast. It doesn't always focus on things that you would expect. But we always get an opportunity to learn something. So, and of course, Brendan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Honored to be on your show. Thank you.
Yeah, I tell you, great topic, and we really appreciate your investment of time today.
Anytime.
There you go. I think we're all wrapped up, right, John?
Yeah, that's been another great episode of Pineapple on Pizza with your hosts, John and George. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you again, Brendan. Take care.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for joining another great episode of Pineapple on Pizza. You can find show notes, links, and resources by visiting omnistruct.com/blog. And a huge thank you to all who are preventatively protecting organizations from cyber threats.